now it's time to end our intern and fellow orientation with our Making the Most of Your Intern and Fellow session. So this is where we bring back some PILI interns and PILI fellows to share tips and best practices about how they have been able to make an impactful experience that sets you apart at your agency, but then also sets you up for a career in either public interest law or pro bono service. So here with us, and I'll be spotlighting them so that everyone sees them in the Zoom. We have Irene Sullivan, who's a litigation associate at Kirkland and Ellis, and she was a 2018 PILI fellow at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services. We have Usama Ibrahim, who was an associate at McDermott, Will and Emery, currently, and a 2020 PILI fellow at Legal Aid Chicago. We have Nicole Joseph, who is currently a staff attorney at Prairie State Legal Services. She was a 2016 PILI intern at LAF and a 2017 PILI intern at the Shriver Center. And then Ruben Bautista, who's currently working with the Office of State Representative Theresa, also currently studying for the bar exam. So we're really glad that he was able to put the books away for a minute and come with us. He was a 2019 PILI intern at Equip for Equality and 2020 PILI intern at Shriver Center. So also some double PILIs in our midst. Irene, let's start with you and then go down that line that I was kind of going through. Why don't you introduce yourself briefly? I know I shared where you did your PILI, but tell us a little bit about what work you did during your PILI fellowship, and then what was your favorite moment or part of your PILI internship or fellowship for you?
Sure. So again, my name is Irene, and I'm a third-year litigation associate at Kirkland and Ellis. I did my PILI at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services, and within CVLS, I worked within the Access to Justice group. The Access to Justice group focuses primarily on housing work, so I learned a lot about foreclosures and also administrative review of housing voucher decisions. The highlight of my PILI fellow experience was that a case that I worked on while I was a PILI fellow, I got to take with me back to Kirkland when I started in the fall after finishing the bar exam, working with a person whose voucher we believed was wrongfully terminated, and got to continue to work with the staff at CVLS to prepare the briefing and have my first stand-up experience in court in Chancery Court in Cook County in order to help my client get her voucher back, which we did successfully. So my PILI fellowship was really the first opportunity that I had to take ownership over a case and be the lead on a case and get my first stand-up in court experience. So it was a very positive overall.
Great. Usama, tell us a little bit about your PILI experience.
Hello, everybody. As Brent said, thank you, first of all, to Brent and the PILI team for inviting us to speak today. And thank you all for attending. I know that our attendance at our orientation last year when it was virtual wasn't the best. So I'm very grateful that we have a lot of people here today. And also, I want to echo Ray's sentiment from earlier before. I'll say it really quickly. You guys are amazing. Congratulations to those of you who graduated. Good luck on the bar. It's really challenging to balance the PILI and the bar, but you guys are going to do a fantastic job at it. So as Brent mentioned earlier, I was a PILI fellow at the Legal Aid Chicago Children and Families Practice Group, and 2020, so just last summer. And one of the capstone experiences of that summer was there was a client who had this, let me explain the sort of work. I was helping victims of domestic violence and children get out of very abusive situations. So obviously very heart-wrenching work, but very valuable experience. And one of the cornerstone experiences was there was a victim of a stalking situation who was trying her best to get out of it, but she always found that this individual would find her and make her life just miserable. And he had perpetuated abuse on her multiple times. And so we had finally made our way to 555. We secured a victory for the client. She takes us to there's like a mediation room at the end of every courtroom. She takes us into that room and she just breaks down crying. And we, I mean, we've obviously, you know, as a PILI, you get to interact with the client in very limited capacity, but we had worked on this client's case for most of my time there. And I remember I couldn't help it, but I broke down with the client. And I remember just being so happy to have secured that victory for her. She was so happy to finally have secured some form of safety for her, me happy that we had secured that for her. And obviously, it's a reminder that at the receiving end of all the work that you do, there is a person who's going to benefit from the work that you do over the course of the summer. And I think that's the sort of mentality that you should be bringing in. You're there as for the course of the summer, public servant to help somebody make their life a little bit better. And I'm just incredibly grateful to have had that over the course of the last summer.
And Nicole, tell us about your PILI experiences.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. And like Brent said, I had 2 PILI internships, one at LAF, which is now Legal Aid Chicago, same place as Usama just talked about. And I was also in the Children and Families Division. And then I actually did a fall internship with them in their Immigrants and Workers' Right Division, not through PILI, but I can always speak to that as well if anyone has questions about that. And then the following summer, I was at the Shriver Center. So doing pretty different work for anyone who doesn't know LAF, or sorry, I'm going to keep calling it LAF. It's Legal Aid Chicago. They do a lot of direct client services, whereas at the Shriver Center, we're doing more class action work and more policy work, legislative work. So 2 really different ends of the spectrum, all great work. But I think a big takeaway for me in doing 2 internships that were pretty far apart in the type of work that was being done was it helped me realize that I 100% want to do direct services. Legislative work is not for me. I respect everyone who does it. I think the work is incredible. I needed to be face-to-face with clients. And I think the internships helped me know what I already knew. I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew that, but I just needed to have that chance to do it to see if this sparked joy in the same way that direct services did. And it didn't for me. So that was actually helpful. And then I guess my big takeaway at Legal Aid Chicago, this isn't case specific necessarily. I already knew I wanted to do domestic violence work. It's what I spent a lot of time doing in undergrad too. So I think I went in knowing I want to go into nonprofit work. I want to do domestic violence work. But I had a bad child molestation case that summer, and I had to keep rewatching this footage of this child screaming over and over and over because I was looking for certain evidence for our trial. And my boss walks into my little cubicle and she just sees me like staring at the ceiling, like in my swivel chair. And she comes over and she's like, just leave for the day. And I was, horrified because you're an intern and your boss has now just come in and seen you just like kind of unraveling. And the next day I came back in and she had donuts for me and she took me on a walk during lunch. And we just talked a lot about boundaries in the nonprofit world and in legal aid and in domestic violence work specifically. And I still do domestic violence work to this day. It's still what I want to do, but it taught me a lot about my own boundaries, what I'm looking for in a workplace, what I'm looking for in mentors. So it took away a lot more than just the substantive nature of the work I was doing. It taught me a lot about what a good workplace looks like.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for sharing that
Sure.
story. And I also always say internships in law school is sometimes like Goldilocks. It's like finding the right fit that you want to do after law school. So this is the time to even ask your, the other interns at other agencies, what their experience is like so that you get a feel. So Ruben, close us out with this, with your experiences.
Sure. Hey everyone, Ruben Bautista. I want to apologize beforehand of calling in from my phone, from my car. As Brent mentioned, I'm working with State Representative Theresa, and we're having a food distribution event that we've been keeping up every month since the pandemic started. But very glad to be here with you all and sharing my experiences. I was a PILI intern at Equip for Equality and also a PILI intern at the Shriver Center. And at Equip for Equality and at the Shriver Center, I really had some really great experiences. One that I could remember from each is that Equip for Equality, through their employment rights team, we filed demand letters to some of the employers in Chicago and Illinois that had some questions that could potentially be disincentivizing people with disabilities from applying. Each of the interns in the office had to submit, I believe, 5, and we submitted them, and we actually got a response from an employer agreeing to change their language from their application. And that was really a great learning experience as one of my first legal internships, understanding that process before even filing a lawsuit and finding some grounds to negotiate and discuss these sorts of issues with the other side. And at the Shriver Center, I really enjoyed my experience doing some policy advocacy. One of the highlights there was being able to work with the attorneys and leading a housing rights workshop with a community-based organization and informing community residents about their housing rights and answering any questions that they had.
Great, thanks. So also just for everyone, I have a bunch of prepared questions. I can fill the whole hour, but I don't want to. I want to make sure that we get your questions answered. Each year in evaluations, sometimes there's people who say, I wish that they talked more about this. This is your chance to ask that question. Put that in the chat. Chat me that you have a question that you want to ask. This way you get what, you get to hear the answers to the questions that you want. So think about some while I ask some of my prepared ones, and then put it in the chat, and I'll be sure to go to you to ask them or ask our panelists. So Irene, let's start back with you. So you're a new PILI fellow. You maybe had some contact with this agency maybe before. You had a phone call or interview with them. How do you kind of pick up on the culture of the organization, get a feel for, what you should do at the start? And is there anything that you did that made your start more effective, or anything that you, now looking back, wish that you did?
Sure. So I had some contact with my agency before I worked for them. Well, while I was a 3L, I volunteered doing intakes of prospective clients for CVLS. So I had the intake process down, but not too much beyond that. So I was at least a little bit of a familiar face, though, at CVLS to some of the staff. That was both a great thing, and also I think because I had been around the block in some aspects, I think some people initially assumed that I knew a little bit more than I did about the remainder of the operations. So I think in any situation, it's important to if you don't know, to ask questions. You don't have to fake it until you make it. So for example, I was asked, I think on my second day, to go over to court and to stand up in a bunch of status calls, and I didn't even know where the courtroom was, let alone what I was supposed to be doing in that status call. So in that situation, I made sure to, at the end of the day, to go to my supervisor and ask what the procedures are and what the expectations are for what I was supposed to be doing. And that turned into him accompanying me the first day to just walk me through the mechanics of everything. Because there's never, especially when you're brand new to an organization, you might give off an appearance that you're more on top of things than you are. So it's always useful to to ask questions, and no one's ever going to call you out for asking a silly question or anything like that.
Great. Yeah, Usama.
I would say Irene nailed it. Don't fake it till you make it in these particular contexts, because you're working on such, with vulnerable populations on, very already established areas of law. Somebody possibly has a question. So making sure that you understand that is going to be very important. So I would answer this. I did not have any contact with the Children and Families Practice Group in PILI, in legal aid, before I had done my PILI. which was very amazing experience for me, because that way I could go in and say, I have no idea, like teach me everything that I can learn. And so I think that asking questions is probably the most important skill that you have. And if there is a regulatory framework or a statutory framework that your organization or the group that you're in works within, just ask them, like, what are some reading materials that you have that would make me better at what I'm supposed to do over the course of the summer? Or is there a special area of law that you want me to focus in over the course of the summer? Asking questions like that, just understanding what's going to be important and relevant for the rest of the summer is just an extremely valuable thing to have. And I think being honest about time management, right? So you don't want to set weird boundaries where you overcommit and then underdeliver. You want to make sure that you are meeting the expectations that you are setting within the organization. The organization can rely on you to do the valuable work that they're asking you to do. Just remember that you are a guest in these people's organizations. They've welcomed you as a PILI, and just be conscientious of that as you sort of navigate the fellowship or internship.
Oh, sorry. Just to piggyback off that a little bit. So 2 things. I've got an intern this summer, and what we did is we sat down at the beginning of her summer to figure out what her goals were for her internship, because it's really impossible for your mentor or your supervisor to know what you're looking to get out of your internship without you making it known to them. So maybe even just asking your supervisor for a 30-minute meeting so you can let them know, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I'd like to gain some comfort, or please don't ever make me do that. Or I need to ease into this, or I'm trying to walk away with a writing sample, or I want to work on my client, or whatever it is. Let them know so that they can give you work that's in that arena. Otherwise, you might leave your summer saying, I didn't really get work that I wanted to do, but I promise you there's always work that's in the alley that you want to do. It's not for lack of work. It's just for lack of people communicating effectively about what work they want. And there was something else, but I've lost it. So if I remember, I'll jump back in.
Great. Ruben, your thoughts on starting at the agency on the right foot?
I definitely agree with everything that was said. I would say from my own experience, I was really intentional starting off in the organization, and setting up meetings with the individual attorneys that were in the office and getting to know them a bit better, and the type of work that they were working on, and showing the interest that I had in expanding my knowledge in those particular areas of the law that I was not very familiar with, and also being clear about some of the goals that I wanted to achieve by the end of my internship, which earlier on was to build up and continue to improve my legal writing and research, and really got a lot of work based on those conversations and feedback that I received from the attorneys that I worked at in these 2 organizations throughout my legal education.
Great. So for this one, Nicole, I'll start with you, and then mostly go to Nicole and Ruben, and then Irene and Usama, I have another question for you. But what are some tips for interns and fellows who will be potentially working on sensitive and personal issues with people from different cultures and socioeconomic classes? We've had already a session on some vicarious trauma and interviewing legal aid clients, but curious if you both have any tips for how to quickly get comfortable with a client and kind of with that attorney-client relationship, especially jumping in as an intern.
I think that's such a hard question that really can't be answered in just a couple sentences, but I'll do my best. I know that lots of us attorneys are still working on that all the time. So I guess my biggest piece of advice would just be that the client knows their life and their situation the best. And so whatever strikes you as a little bit strange or a little bit off, or maybe the way you wouldn't handle something, that all could be true for yourself, and yet some other truth could be very real for someone else. And you just kind of have to accept that people are walking in your doors with different life experiences, different cultural experiences, different ways of handling something than you might. And so while you might sit there and say, I would have walked away by now, or I don't understand why she's telling me this. This doesn't make sense. That's not how it works in America. That's like a sentence I hear a lot. That's not how it works here in the US. You have to understand that the people walking in those doors are coming in with their own experiences, and you've just got to listen to whatever they're telling you. And then, yes, maybe you do have to explain the framework of the US legal system, with still some compassion and some understanding as to why what their expectation is versus reality is could be two very different things. The best example I have to give of that is a client who walked in, and she was going on and on and on about why her husband was abusing the children and how they had seen an astrologist a number of times, and the astrologist told them all these things. And I think to a lot of people that could come off as what people say is crazy, right? Like, she's just talking about astrology. She's trying to explain, she's going to get up in front of the judge and talk about how the astrologist told her stuff about beating the children. But if you understand Indian culture, astrology is a super, super big part of Indian culture. And people meet with astrologists just in the same way in the US that people meet with religious figures or anything like that. And I think luckily I was the one who met with her at the courthouse, and I could go to my supervisor and say, one, I'm conscious of the way this is going to come across to the judge, and yet this is her reality. And so we need to come up with a culturally sensitive way to make sure that we get this information across the judge correctly without making the client feel like she's crazy. And in fact, it was very bold and brave of her to share those things with us, potentially knowing that she's coming across sounding different than many of our other clients. So, I think I'm lucky to have known that was something, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's part of the problem. And so just being accepting of what people are telling you as true, especially when it comes from a place of culture or language or things like that, is important.
Thanks. Ruben, any thoughts on working with legal aid clients?
I would say that one of the most important things is to build the trust between you and the client that you're serving. Whenever I had the opportunity to work directly with the client and speak with the client, I will always start off with some of get to know questions to see and learn more about their life and their background, and based on those conversations, share some of my own experiences and be able to connect at that personal level before even touching on a legal issue that they're having, because having the trust of the client is super important in order to be able to use the legal skills that we've been privileged enough to gain throughout these 3 years of law school in order to help and better serve the client's interests that we're serving.
Great. So for Irene and Usama, can you talk, and this was a question asked to me in the chat, so please, privately or with everyone, use the chat to let me know that you have questions that you want to ask our panelists. So for Irene and Usama, talk to me a little bit more about how you balance bar prep with a PILI fellowship. Maybe go into a little bit more about what your schedule is like. Irene, a little bit more in the real world, and then Usama last year still in this virtual environment, and then any tips that you had. Usama, do you want to start us off first?
Certainly, sure. So as Brent indicated, I did do bar prep through the COVID world, and my first tip and trick is time management, as I mentioned before, is going to be just your guide. But I recommend, I was going to say I need you, but I also really strongly recommend that you be flexible and nice to yourself, because the bar prepping process is intentionally just a challenging phase of study. It is in many ways the final exam that you'll be taking, should this be the last certification exam that you want to take. So in very many ways, the way that I handled it was there were certain days that I reserved for my PILI fellowship, and there were certain days that were reserved for bar prep. So I liked my PILI fellowship so much that I tried to do it simultaneously with bar prep. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that was just PILI fellow days. I tried my best to do the work. In the evenings, it would be, if I had work to do, I'd continue doing that work. and self-care, which I know this panel will touch on. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday were just bar prep days. And I just think it was a great system for me personally. I like the idea of actually doing substantive legal work simultaneously as I was doing bar prep. It really reinforced and reminded me why I wanted to become a lawyer, all the amazing work that I was doing. But those are sort of the things that I would recommend. With regards to the PILI being virtual, you're going to realize you're going to have Zoom fatigue relatively quickly. You're not going to want to look at TV screens or computer screens. So I would recommend where bar prep allows using, paper and pen, just going back to the basics, reading as you would on paper. It's gentler on the eyes, gentler on, your mental ability. I don't know what the blue light science is, but you just want to get away from screens where you can, because you're always in front of it. Sort of taking that time to really digest the material, think about the material, reflect on it outside of like the screen context was incredibly helpful for me.
That's a great tip. I never even thought of, to try to get paper material when you can.
Right.
Irene, what about, how did you plan your schedule, and any tips you remember from bar prep?
Sure. So I, for about 6 weeks in June and early July, in a non-COVID world, I was at my PILI agency Monday to Friday from I think about 8 to noon. I worked half days in the morning, and then I would go home, take a break for lunch, and then do bar prep in the afternoon. Usually until about the early evening, maybe until about like 7 o'clock at night. I do that 5 days a week. I then would also study for the bar on Saturdays, or maybe Sunday, usually 1 day per weekend. I thought it was important for me to take 1 day off where I wasn't doing anything. And then I did take about 2 weeks before the end of the bar to just do bar full time, because at that point, I'm not sure if it's strictly necessary, but at least my nerves were getting to me. So it was useful to have like just bar time at that point. I do think it's really helpful to juggle something else while doing the bar exam. The bar exam can be it's a lot of information, but to do well, you don't need to be spending 100% of your time between now and the end of July. And it can feel like there's so much that you're tempted to just keep studying. And I thought it was useful to have that part of my day blocked off where I didn't and couldn't think about the bar exam. So in terms of a time management tool, I thought PILI was very, very helpful for that. And then for the rest of the structure of my PILI, after the bar exam, I took like a 3-week bar trip, which I hope that some of you are able to do some form of in this emerging from COVID vaccine world. And then I did about 5 weeks full time before I started at my firm in the fall. So it is not the greatest summer of your life, to be sure, but it doesn't have to be totally unbearable too, and PILI can help you structure it.
If I can chime in
Please.
Just for a moment, I also took like two weeks right before the bar. Of course, my bar exam was postponed to, I think it was August and then September and then October. It was there was a lot of postponing, but I had taken time off right before what I perceived to be the first time we were going to take the bar exam. And I agree with that strategy. I think it's just great. I don't think it's necessary. I just think I really like the comfort of knowing that there was time where I was completely committed to studying for the bar. And
I will just say that I think a lot of our supervisors are also very mindful of the PILI fellows and all the juggling that you're doing. And, at some point in June, they've probably had PILI fellows come to them and say, we need to re-talk about my schedule because it's not working. And they, so I would just say if you're struggling at any point, reach out to your supervisor. They may have ideas. I think one really great part about being a PILI fellow is you're working alongside attorneys who have all done this. And so, we've all gone through the bar exam. We know how rough it is. And so you kind of get that motivation through the summer. So please, Nicole.
So I did not do a PILI fellowship while I studied for the bar, but I have taken another bar exam since, and I did work full time while I took it. So I was working 9 to 5, and kind of to echo what Irene and Usama said, it's totally doable. And actually to have your brain occupied by something else during the day allows you to focus more than I did when I took Illinois, because you are just consumed with like, oh, I'm going to fail this thing. Like that was all my thoughts all the time the first time around. And granted, I had already done it, but I think it just allows you to kind of separate the two. The piece of advice I have is actually just to not compare yourself to anyone else. Your Themis, Barbary, progress bar is going to be going wherever it's going, and some people will have done more than you, and some people have done less than you, and maybe the Adaptabar, things work for you better, maybe the flashcards work for you better. So just don't sit there looking at that progress bar and eat yourself up based on where you're at versus your peers, because you're doing a lot more than your peers and that you're also working. And two, that doesn't mean you're not taking the information in. In fact, you might be taking it in even better because you've got a limited amount of time to do it. So just don't compare yourself to other people studying at the same time.
That's good advice for everyone, whether they're whether they're a 2L and remember that for your 3L studying for the bar exam. One more question about the PILI fellowship. I think Irene, you said that you still had hours after the bar exam. How many did you have to complete? And then Usama, maybe tell us a little bit about whether you also had, whether you did everything before or how you set that. But Irene, maybe first.
It's been a couple of years, so this might be a little off, but if I remember correctly, I think it was a 300-hour requirement the summer that I did it. And I think I probably divided it roughly a third before the bar and 2/3 after the bar. My situation might be a little atypical because my law school didn't finish until the first week of June, and my firm had a policy that you could not start your PILI until after your graduation. So I got a little bit of a later start, maybe the second week of June than I think some of my peers when they started PILI. But I wrapped up that last chunk in about 5 or 6 weeks full time. And I thought it was nice to be able to do some of it full time. I think you get a little bit more of an immersive experience being able to come back for those like full days. But it was a manageable way to do it on either end of the process.
So the way I did it was I knew we had the hour requirement and I just started much earlier. So I started my PILI in February. I had communicated with the people there that I was really interested in getting started early. They were enthusiastic because they were underwater. And so I just started Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from February up until that time where we had to study for the bar. So I didn't have hours to complete afterwards, but they did offer me the opportunity to come back and do work with them. And I know we're going to talk about that perhaps later on, but I tried my best to sort of make sure that relationship was there so that I can do that work as a lawyer with McDermott and Emery.
Great. So let's kind of go on a different vein for Nicole and Ruben. Let's start with both of you. But what qualities and attributes in an intern and fellow make someone stand out as a star intern or fellow at an agencies? Have you witnessed now as a supervisor, Nicole, or Ruben, as being an intern in so many different agencies, issues that other kind of younger lawyers or interns or fellows, other issues or problems that you've seen, or any other ideas of ways to stand out?
Yeah, so I think the interns that have stood out are not the ones that come in, knowing the Illinois Domestic Violence Act back and forth. I don't think that anyone is looking for you to substantively know everything that's going on in the field. Really, it's the ones that are eager to learn. As cheesy as that sounds, it's the ones that come in every day saying, all right, I'm up for the challenge. I don't know that I'm going to get it right, but I'm up to try. We've had interns in the past who came in giving us their laundry list of things they don't want to do. And while that's helpful in some ways to just know where your comfort levels are, at the end of the day, you're looking for something from us, but we're also looking for something from you. And the hope is that we're not just babysitting a law student all summer, that there's a mutually beneficial relationship here. You're getting some good work done. You're getting something out of it. We're getting something out of it. So I think you being willing to try new things, to try to do everything is going to be out of your comfort zone, right? Your 1L or 2L, you haven't practiced yet. Everything is out of your comfort zone, whether that's getting up in front of the judge, writing motions, calling clients. All of these things are new things. So just being up for a new challenge. And then also the interns that have checked in as they do assignments, I think end up doing a better job, because the reality is, again, you don't know what you're doing, and that's okay. But if at the end you work on something for 2 weeks and you turn in a product that's just totally different than what anyone was looking for, then all it is a wasted 2 weeks on the agency's end, still probably somewhat productive for you guys. But if you check in during it, I can course correct and say, hey, this part looks good, but this part needs revamping, so don't keep going down that road. Or having a pep talk with your supervisor before you walk into court, making sure you know all the things you're going to say, so that your supervisor doesn't have to run up from the back behind you to fix whatever's going on in court. Just checking in along the way, I think, has helped create some really good work product and a really good outcome for both the intern and the supervisor.
Great. Ruben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off what Nicole mentioned. I think communication is super important. Always communicating with your supervisor or the attorney that has assigned you a task on the development of your task. If you have any questions regarding your task or clarifications, in order to be able to turn in the work product that they've asked you to turn in. And I think also Usama mentioned this earlier, but being conscious of your time and managing that time with the tasks that you're able to complete throughout your internship is super important. It's not about the volume of work that you're producing, but it's about the quality of work that you'll be producing.
Great. Usama and Irene, do you have other ideas of ways to stand out as a PILI fellow?
I just want to vocalize that the staff in in any legal organization are basically the most consequential people who help everything get moving. And so, when we open up in person, taking them out to lunch, getting to know them is just as valuable, if not more important, than getting to know the supervisors and the other lawyers at these facilities. I just think I got to know the paralegals who work with us relatively well, and that was immensely, I love them, and we're Instagram friends and we send memes to each other all the time. But all that to say that these are people who understand the law inside and out, who can really help you. Whenever I had a question and I felt like I was too nervous to bring it to one of the lawyers on the team, I would always bring it to the paralegals and be like, okay, I've just got this request. I'm not sure how to get through it. Another pro tip to be like a star is, if you have a question or there's a research question given to you, try to repeat that question to the supervisor right when they give it to you. And I think I do this to this day. It reinforces and makes sure, A, that you understand the question, and B, make sure that, just as Nicole said, they know that you're doing the right thing. You're on the right track. And course correcting over the course of the project, just to make sure that the scope is correct, is a good idea. But making sure that you're starting out on the right track is just incredibly helpful.
Irene, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I agree with everything that's already been said. One thing I'd add is to communicate about what your workload is. If you have interest and time, you should. Sometimes I think every PILI will work at a different pace, and supervisors can be especially mindful that you're juggling a lot with the PAR. But if you do have time and interest, I think supervisors always appreciate it if if you raise your hand and say, I'm interested in this, or I'd like to be doing more of this, or I have time to take on this. Particularly if you are in a remote environment where your supervisor isn't able to get any sort of a sense of how your how your time is going over the course of the day. But then, the converse of that too, I think, almost every supervisor is going to be mindful and understanding if you can't complete something because you're also juggling, studying for the bar or other commitments. So just being vocal about that and, stating what's realistic as early as possible and not leaving supervisors in the lurch, particularly when a deadline is coming up, I think is always appreciated.
Great. So this is another question from someone in the chat. So again, just as a reminder, you can ask me privately. That's what most people have done right now instead of asking the group, I guess, which is totally fine to ask a question. So, but this is a great question. A lot of, the traditional advice that we can read is about building personal relationships with attorneys. Usama just was talking about that. It's a little bit harder now in this virtual setting. So what ideas do you have for people to, workarounds to build those relationships, not only with the staff at the agency, but also their fellow interns and fellows who are working alongside them, when you can't just, drop by someone's desk or meet casually in the office. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in first.
What I'm doing with my intern, and I've only had her for like 2 weeks, so we'll see if this works. We're doing like a weekly check-in meeting so that she just has some face-to-face contact every week, at least with me. And then she's invited every week to our general staff meeting. And I think this is kind of the job of the supervisor to make sure that the intern gets introduced around to everyone. I think that's a lot to put on the law student to just say, you go meet all these adults and all these attorneys and all these paralegals. Hopefully your supervisor is helping a little bit with that. But during those staff meetings, just piping in. I know that you probably feel like you don't have a lot to say, or maybe it's not the time to say it, but just letting everyone know, hey, I worked on this week. I thought it was really cool. Or even just asking people, what'd you do this weekend? Normal conversations you have with people in life. These are just people at the end of the day. Yes, they are attorneys, but they're also just people who have a lot of the same interests as you, right? That's why we're all here. So just striking up a conversation. We are some interns in person. So if you are in person, the lunchroom is the perfect place to meet people. Like Usama said, the paralegals, the support staff are the most invaluable people at these places. They know everything about what's going on. So making sure that you're also just kind to everyone you work with. Not that I think any of you wouldn't be, but every person you meet, these are tight-knit circles. And everybody knows everyone. So just being respectful, no matter what interaction you're having, even on your hard days, as much as you can, just being kind, personable, nice, optimistic. Those are really helpful things in the legal aid world.
Yes, the front desk person is the way to the heart of the agency, is being friendly with the front desk person. Ruben, I saw you start to unmute. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think just a jumping off point of conversation would be the initial task that you have with a new attorney at the organization that you're working at. It's always whether or not there is already a scheduled meeting to discuss the project. I will definitely reach out to the attorney to have a conversation about the project and get to know more about the practice area that they're working on, if that's the case, and getting to know, or like starting to get to know more of the attorneys working at the organization that you'll be at this summer, based on the assignments that you're getting from the individual attorney, or if the supervisor is handing out assignments, making sure to connect with your supervisor about getting to know or connected to a different attorney at the agency is super important.
Summary, yeah, please.
Oh, sure. I just think that typically in summers, people are really excited to meet the people who are interested in coming to their organization. So reaching out to lawyers in the team and setting up 30-minute chats, get to know them, get to know what led them to this kind of work, what inspired them, what schools they went to, how they liked it, getting to know them. Well, you can know historical information, but also getting to know them like real people, like Nicole mentioned, like their hobbies or things they liked or what they did last week. And that's just incredibly valuable and really just, a friend of mine keeps telling me, that the way not to be awkward is don't be an iguana. I don't know why she settled on the end of being iguana, but just don't be an iguana over the course of the summer internship. Get to know the people. They're people just like you. They were probably, if not PILIs, then people who did summers or experiences internships at the places that they currently work at. So just getting to know them like that is just incredibly helpful, and a great way to just reach out and meet people.
Irene?
The one thing that I would add, one way that I felt I better got to know some of the staff members at my agency was they have a big fundraiser every year. Race Judicata is this huge 5K where they take over a park, and it's kind of an all hands on deck. You know, everyone from the administrative staff to the CEO are stuffing race packets and handing out registration forms, and for us, it was an expectation that interns would be part of that event and manning it and staffing it. But it was a lot of fun and a good way to get, it was kind of like a bonding experience too, where the entire organization is in one room working together on this event. And I know different organizations have, you know, different opportunities in terms of fundraisers and CLE and things like that. To the extent that those opportunities that exist in this, you know, now virtual hybrid mode that, you know, might be after hours, it's worth giving up an evening or two of your time to kind of participate in those sort of group activities to the extent they're happening.
Great. So we had a session on vicarious trauma, and we talked a little bit about this with interviewing tips, but I was wondering if we could go down the line and talk about if each of you have any practices for self-care or any tips you have for new attorneys in the field who might be, I feel like this is now, it used to be just, you know, legal aid attorneys talking about this primarily. And now with the pandemic, we all need more self-care. We all have probably learned that we need time away from Zoom, away from our computers. So curious if you all have tips for our interns and fellows this summer on practicing self-care. Anyone want to jump in first?
I'll go, although it might be a little heavy. So again, I do domestic violence work, so maybe this is different in different areas of legal aid. But I think finding your boundaries is so important. We have a lot of cases where people are threatening race-based violence. And it took me a long time to be able to go to my supervisor and say, I am not comfortable doing this. We have a lot of white attorneys. I should not be the one in that courtroom when people are saying things like this. And it was so uncomfortable for me to say that. Who wants to be the one to go to their supervisor and say something like that? And her response was incredible. She was just like, yeah, of course, we're taking any of those cases. You're right. Every single other one of our domestic violence attorneys is white. And they aren't facing that when they walk into a courtroom. But it took me coming to terms with like the fact that that was something I couldn't do or wasn't comfortable doing. I could do it, right? I can do it and capable of doing it. It doesn't make me less, getting to a place where I realized it doesn't make me any less of an attorney to have a boundary was important. Or we have another attorney who we do a lot of child abuse. She's got a 1-year-old, and for whatever reason, the babies being molested is really hard for her, and having a boundary saying, those are the ones I can't be on is okay, because for me, I don't have any kids and I can do those ones just fine, you know? So I think just as you do the work, learning what those things that do really set you off or trigger you or just are really hard for you, it's okay to express those things to a supervisor and talk about them. You're not required to take it all on. You are required to do good work and you are required to step up to the challenge, but not at the cost of your personal sanity or your mental health. So as hard as those conversations are, I've only ever been met with kindness when I've had them. So I would just challenge you guys to set your boundaries once you realize what they are.
Well, thank you for your vulnerability sharing that, Nicole. Irene, I saw you unmute too. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Mine from more of a practical perspective, I think I found it very important when I was studying the bar just to make plans. I think it's, especially when you're studying for the bar when doing your PILI, very easy to find yourself just going through Barbary exercises all the time if you don't have a deadline to yourself to stop. And I think that's, I can imagine that that would be even harder in this virtual world where we're all used to being at home and not having as many plans as we might have in the past. So my advice would be to make sure that you have some commitments in the summer, in the evenings or on the weekends, just to force yourself to get away from your computer for at least some time. You'll be more refreshed and focused when you go back to your computer.
Thank you. Usama?
I agree 100%. I think making plans for the work that you do, but also making plans for the fun things that you do is just as equally important. One of the interesting things that I didn't think about when I was doing the PILI, I was doing a lot of the work. I know Nicole and I had similar PILI experiences. It's incredibly challenging. And there was this phrase that was that I was introduced to, which was secondhand trauma. And that's a real phenomenon. You have to be very conscientious of the sort of experiences. And that doesn't discount the trauma that these people are experiencing, but that you hearing about it, reading about it day in and day out does have an impact on you. And so thinking about how you are consuming other forms of information is really important. So personally for me, I remember I walked in to a supervisor's office one of these days, and I was like, oh, did you see blank in the news? And it was just like, it was a sad news piece, but it was like, oh my God, it was so horrifying to me that I felt like I was compelled to share it with my supervisor. My supervisor was like, ever since I've taken this job, I've stopped consuming other forms of media because I don't want to read more sad things when my day is over, if that makes sense. And so I think the media that you consume after a long, hard day of work with PILI, or even a short, not so hard day of work, depending on the sort of content you've consumed, is very important. And then for me, comedies at the end of the day, like the shows that I normally would like Parks and Recreation and other, funny shows, were just really important for me to, balance it out.
Ruben, what about your tips for self-care?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that was said. I think it's also okay to not be okay, and understanding that. If you go through a difficult experience at work, working with a client that's going through a super difficult experience, I think it's always good to touch base with your supervisor or the attorney on that case afterwards, and having a conversation about not only how you're feeling, but also about how they go through it and how they internalize these type of cases through the work that they do. Because essentially, like my supervisors at the organizations that I was an intern at, were not just my supervisors, but were also my mentors, and they guided me through those difficult experiences. And I would definitely recommend to have those conversations throughout your summer as a PILI intern or fellow.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of the session. And so I have one last question that appropriately is about how to end your summer internship or fellowship. So what ideas do you have for folks about ending their summer and then maintaining a relationship with the agency even beyond the summer? Either things that you've done or other ideas that you have. Irene, do you want to start us off this time?
Sure. Well, my agency thankfully didn't give me much of an option because they are very good at saddling outgoing PILIs with some pro bono work to take back to their law firms, and I was no exception to that. And that's what is, I think, a great thing about PILI. A lot of the agencies allow you to, you can get to learn a lot about an area of law, and then that might not be the primary form of your practice if you're going to a firm, but then be able to carry that back with you. So I would, of course, inquire about ongoing pro bono opportunities once you do start full time at your law firm if you are a fellow. I also have been able to keep in touch with people at my organization by going to, in a virtual and non-virtual world, going to their fundraisers, also going to PILI events, because people at my agency also show up at PILI events. So that's a way to keep in touch with them and the broader PILI network too. So I guess, asking for work and showing up to things are the two primary ways.
Perfect. I can't argue with showing up to PILI events. So Usama, what about your ideas?
100% seconded. I was going to say, because Irene was mentioning a lot of the work-based ways that you can be involved, and I was going to suggest, which Irene also did, more of the fun-based things, which is all of these people also like to have fun. If you're invited to, fundraisers or other activities that the group that you were involved in did or are doing or historically have done, just attend and show your face there and have some fun and remain connected with these people, because not only are they just supervisors, but optimistically and based on my experience, they become friends, and just continue to nurture those friendships. And it was just a fantastic time and experience.
Great. Nicole, what about your thoughts?
I would say more than at the end of your summer, something you should do throughout the summer. And I'm not sure if PILI makes you do this or not, so if they do, forgive me. But I would just keep a log of what you're doing all summer, so that at the end of it, you don't have to go back and sit down and say, how do I edit my resume? What should I add in here? What did I actually substantively do? Especially if you have a lot of small assignments, it's easy to forget exactly what work you did if it's coming in from different practice groups and things like that. If you work on one thing the whole summer, you'll know what to add to your resume or talk about with people. But having just a log allows you to kind of summarize, what you did for yourself and for others. And then in terms of keeping in touch, obviously, you want to send, I gave my supervisors thank you cards and a small gift at the end of the summer for their hard work that they put into making sure I had a good summer. And I've kept in touch with them since then. Actually, as we've sat on this panel, I kept thinking I need to email her, because she clearly, impacted me a lot. One thing I would say is a lot of you will probably, if you choose to continue to do legal aid or nonprofit work, a lot of you might apply for Equal Justice Works fellowships or Skadden fellowships and things like that. And I won't go into all of that, but it requires you to create a project with a host organization. And a lot of people will go back to their organizations that they worked at during the summers to create that project. And so you don't want to be in the position of not having spoken to these people since your 1L summer, and now it's 2 full years later, and you're looking for them to help you out. So, maintaining that contact throughout, you never know how people will be able to help you or how you'll be able to help them. And so I like to just shoot my supervisors, past people I've met, an email at the end of each year of law school, just saying, hey, this is what I was up to this year. Hope you're well. What have you been up to? How's your, kid, if you remember their name, or their spouse, or whoever it is, or if you see something that reminds you of someone, just shooting them a text. Like I said, this community is as nice as it can get, as nice as people can get, and people are always happy to hear from you. So reach out when you can.
Great ideas. Ruben, close us out with this.
Oh my God, this is gonna be, I don't think I can follow through all these great points. Yeah, I think being clear about your goals and objectives after finishing off your PILI internship or fellowship. I know I had those conversations with the organizations I was with, and I actually, just following up on what Nicole was mentioning, I submitted a Skadden fellowship with one of my PILI internship sites. And worked throughout that summer building up this project, because I had built up this relationship with the attorneys there and knew the work that I wanted to work on and knew the work that they needed to work on in the state of Illinois. And it was a really great experience. And actually fun. It's interesting that we're speaking about this now, because my supervisor actually just reached out to me, just checking in on me and how bar prep is going. So yeah, building those relationships is super key, and they the attorneys at the organizations you work at are really there for you and rooting for you.
Well, thank you, Irene, Nicole, Usama, Ruben. This has been a wonderful panel. As I like to say on Zooms, dozens of muted claps, appreciating you all. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's our always a wonderful start of the summer to have everyone together for these sessions. So hope you were able to get some insights and maybe some connections that will help you throughout the summer and to start your summer off right. And PILI will be here each week with new sessions about various topics. Next week is our judges panel on June 9th, and we'll be sending out an email shortly with more information for you to join us for that and for other sessions as well. So thank you and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you.